May 27, 1942, Pearl Harbor. In the basement of a nondescript building, the hum of electric fans mingles with the staccato rhythm of typewriter keys. Commander Joseph Rochefort, wearing his customary bathrobe and slippers, hunches over stacks of intercepted Japanese radio transmissions. The air is thick with cigarette smoke and the weight of impending revelation. His team of cryptanalysts has been working around the clock, their eyes burning from strain, their minds racing to decode what could be the most crucial intelligence of the Pacific War. Outside, the harbor still bears scars from that December morning, twisted metal reminders of American vulnerability. But down here, in this cramped basement that the Navy calls Station Hypo, vulnerability is transforming into power through the arcane art of code-breaking. The intercepted message before Rochefort contains a simple but electrifying phrase. AF is short of water. Those 5 words represent the culmination of months of painstaking work breaking the Japanese Navy's JN-25 code. AF had been the mystery designation in countless enemy transmissions, a target so important that Admiral Yamamoto himself was massing the largest naval armada in history to attack it. Through an ingenious deception, having Midway send an uncoded message about water shortages, Rochefort's team had just confirmed that AF meant Midway Atoll. The trap was set, but not the one the Japanese intended. For the Imperial Japanese Navy, the Midway operation represented the apotheosis of their strategic thinking. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, had convinced his reluctant colleagues that only by destroying America's remaining aircraft carriers could Japan secure victory. The plan was elegant in its complexity. A massive diversionary strike against the Aleutian Islands would draw American forces north, while the main battle fleet would annihilate Midway's defenses and lie in wait for the inevitable American relief force. When Admiral Chester Nimitz's carriers rushed to save Midway, they would sail into a carefully orchestrated ambush involving over 200 ships, 700 aircraft, and the combined might of 11 battleships and 8 carriers. Japanese naval intelligence had convinced itself of American predictability. Their assessments suggested that American forces remained scattered across the Pacific, with at least one carrier group still operating near Australia after the Coral Sea engagement. Radio intercepts seemed to confirm minimal American naval activity around Hawaii. The elaborate intelligence apparatus of the Imperial Navy, built on decades of careful study and cultural confidence, painted a picture of American weakness and strategic confusion. Admiral Chuchi Nagumo, commanding the 1st Carrier Striking Force, expected to find Midway defended by perhaps a handful of outdated aircraft and a skeleton crew of Marines. The mathematical certainty of Japanese superiority made detailed reconnaissance seem unnecessary. Why count sheep when you commanded wolves?
What the Japanese admirals could not fathom was that their most sensitive communications had become an open book to their enemies. Every fleet movement, every operational order, every logistical detail flowed through radio networks that Station Hypo monitored with mechanical precision.
Rochefort's team knew that Carrier Divisions 1 and 2 would participate in the attack. They knew that the combined fleet would sortie from multiple bases on May 27th. They knew that the submarine cordon would be positioned between Hawaii and Midway by June 1st. They even knew that Japanese seaplanes would attempt to refuel at French frigate shoals for a reconnaissance mission that Nimitz had already thwarted by stationing destroyers there.
The intelligence flowing into Admiral Nimitz's headquarters was so detailed, so comprehensive, that it seemed almost too good to be true. His staff diary for May 27th recorded a haunting uncertainty. Of course, it may turn out that the Japanese are pulling our leg and using radio deception on a grand scale. But Nimitz chose to believe in his codebreakers. committing his entire available force to a position northwest of Midway, based purely on Rochefort's intelligence.
Task Force 16, built around the carriers Enterprise and Hornet, would sail on May 28th. The damaged Yorktown, given a miraculous 72-hour repair at Pearl Harbor, would follow 2 days later. Everything, America's future in the Pacific, the outcome of the war itself, rested on the accuracy of intercepts decoded in a basement by men who had never fired a shot in anger. The symbol of American industrial might that would define this battle was not a weapon, but a simple object: the endless reams of paper flowing through the teletypes and copying machines of Station Hypo. While Japanese admirals relied on oral briefings and ceremonial presentations, American intelligence became democratized through mass-produced documentation. Every intercept was copied, distributed, analyzed, and filed with machine-like efficiency. The paper itself, clean, white, abundant, represented something the resource-starved Japanese empire increasingly lacked: the luxury of redundancy. Where Japanese communications required elaborate conservation of materials and careful reuse of Psycher keys, American intelligence operations consumed paper with industrial abandon, creating multiple copies of every decoded message, every analysis, every operational summary. This cascade of documentation meant that crucial intelligence could never be lost to a single point of failure, never be suppressed by a single officer's judgment, never be filtered through the hierarchical deference that characterized Japanese command structure. June 4, 1942. 0430 hours, northwest of Midway Atoll. Admiral Nagumo's first carrier striking force encounters something impossible. According to every intelligence estimate, every strategic calculation, every assumption that had guided Japanese planning, American aircraft carriers precisely positioned for battle. The sight that greets Japanese lookouts defies comprehension. Instead of racing to respond to a surprise attack, American dive bombers are already airborne, already positioned, already executing coordinated strikes that suggest foreknowledge of Japanese intentions. The mathematical impossibility of American preparedness creates a cognitive dissonance among Japanese commanders that will persist throughout the battle. How could carriers that intelligence placed near Australia be attacking from the northeast? How could American aircraft be striking at the exact moment when Japanese flight decks were most vulnerable during aircraft rearming operations? As the carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu transformed into floating infernos within minutes of each other, Japanese communications networks erupted in confusion that would have been incomprehensible to their users months earlier. Radio operators desperately transmitted damage reports, tactical updates, and requests for assistance without realizing that every transmission was being intercepted, decoded, and analyzed by the same intelligence apparatus that had orchestrated their destruction. The Japanese naval code that had protected their most sensitive communications for over a year continued to function exactly as designed, encrypting and transmitting their defeat in real time to an enemy that understood their language better than they understood their situation. Admiral Yamamoto, commanding the main body from his flagship Yamato 600 miles to the west, received reports that seemed to describe a fever dream rather than a naval engagement. His carefully orchestrated ambush had somehow become a perfectly executed American ambush. The carriers that were supposed to be rushing blindly into his trap had instead appeared exactly where they needed to be to inflict maximum damage on his striking force. The timeline of American attacks suggested not merely good fortune, but systematic preparation based on detailed foreknowledge. As radio reports filtered in describing the destruction of 3/4 of his carrier striking power within a 6-hour period, Yamamoto confronted a reality that challenged every assumption of Japanese naval supremacy. The Americans knew they were coming. The psychological impact of Midway on Japanese naval leadership transcended tactical defeat to become existential crisis. For officers trained in the tradition of Japanese spiritual superiority and tactical innovation, the mathematical precision of American preparedness suggested capabilities that their worldview could not accommodate. Rather than investigate the possibility of compromised communications, Japanese post-battle analysis focused on tactical errors, personal failures, and the cruel intervention of fate. Admiral Nagumo was criticized for his indecision during aircraft rearming operations. Pilots were blamed for insufficient reconnaissance. Weather conditions were cited as decisive factors. The idea that American intelligence had penetrated their most secure communications remained literally unthinkable, not because evidence was lacking, but because such penetration would have required acknowledging American technological and organizational superiority in areas where Japanese confidence was absolute. The transformation in Japanese strategic thinking following Midway revealed the extent to which their pre-battle confidence had rested on assumptions rather than analysis. Intelligence reports had consistently portrayed American forces as reactive, predictable, and strategically inferior. The idea that American codebreakers might have achieved cryptologic capabilities superior to Japanese efforts was dismissed not through investigation, but through institutional denial. Even when subsequent American operations demonstrated similar patterns of precise timing and unexpected preparedness, Japanese leadership preferred explanations based on luck, espionage, or tactical brilliance, rather than confronting the possibility that their communication security had been comprehensively compromised. The paper trail that documented American intelligence success became a monument to systematic analysis over intuitive genius. Rochefort's basement operation had transformed raw intercepts into operational intelligence through processes that were industrially replicable rather than dependent on individual inspiration. Every decoded message was cross-referenced with previous intercepts, analyzed for technical intelligence, and integrated into comprehensive assessments that painted detailed pictures of Japanese intentions. This methodical approach meant that even partial intercepts could be interpreted within broader contexts, that individual messages gained meaning through systematic comparison with historical patterns, that intelligence analysis became a cumulative process rather than a series of isolated insights.
Admiral Nimitz's post-battle assessment captured the essence of American intelligence success. Had we lacked early information of the Japanese movement, and had we been caught with carrier task forces dispersed, possibly as far away as the Coral Sea, the Battle of Midway would have ended far differently. His words acknowledged not merely the tactical value of intelligence, but its strategic necessity. American victory had required not just knowing Japanese intentions, but knowing them with sufficient precision to position forces optimally despite significant numerical inferiority. The margin for error in Pacific naval warfare was so small that even perfect tactical execution could not compensate for strategic surprise. Intelligence had provided the strategic initiative that transformed American numerical weakness into tactical advantage.
The reverberations of Midway extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation to fundamentally alter the trajectory of Pacific naval warfare. Japanese naval aviation, which had operated with assumed superiority since Pearl Harbor, now confronted an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The psychological warfare value of communications intelligence proved as significant as its tactical applications. Japanese commanders who had grown accustomed to strategic initiative now found themselves responding to American moves rather than dictating the pace of operations. The confidence that had enabled aggressive long-range operations gave way to defensive caution that would characterize Japanese strategy for the remainder of the war. In the basement of Station Hypo, where electric fans still hummed and typewriters still clattered, the transformation of warfare through information had achieved its first decisive victory. The men who wore bathrobes instead of uniforms, who fought with mathematics instead of weapons, who commanded paper instead of ships, had proven that in modern warfare, the ability to read the enemy's mind could be more valuable than the ability to outgun his fleet. Their victory was measured not in tonnage sunk or territory captured, but in knowledge gained and opportunities seized. The Japanese admirals, who had sailed confident in their strategic brilliance, returned home shocked by the recognition that their most carefully guarded secrets had become American assets. Their most sophisticated plans had become American advantages. Their most decisive battle had become their most devastating defeat through the simple but revolutionary act of listening to what they thought no one could hear.